Hi, this is Scott Webster. I'm sitting here with Luke Gaul.
Hello.
This is the Android Guys podcast. And this season, or this series of shows, we are dedicating to the history of Android.
Mm-hmm.
We're getting in our little virtual DeLoreans and heading back about 12 years today. We're going to go back 2009. Now, the last episode we talked was based around April 2009.
Yeah, we're in the same year.
So things are moving fast. Things are happening pretty quickly for Android.
Yeah.
So before we dive into it, just to kind of set the table, if you haven't listened to any of these other episodes, Luke and I are taking a look at Android's key features and releases along the way and what was being added to the platform, what the phones look like at the time, and seeing some of the innovation, the evolution of phones and Android at the same time. And then we're also kind of setting that against the backdrop of, historical context. What did the world look like at the time? And we've been picking pop culture, movies, music, and television. Some of these really date the platform and put them kind of in a weird place.
Yeah.
And they also kind of make you think, wow, I remember what my life was like at that time.
Sure.
Luke, September 2009. We're only talking about 5 months after Android 1.5 Cupcake.
Yeah.
Now we have what's known as Android 1.6 Donut.
Yeah.
And this is the first time we realized, okay, so the last version was a C. This is a D. Is there something here?
Right.
And then we would really start to kind of feel that cement itself with...
What's with the dessert themes?
Yeah.
It's kind of like...
And that's another thing. If we look at it now, cupcakes aren't desserts necessarily. Neither are donuts.
Right.
But for the longest time, people just kind of said, oh, they're dessert themed. They're sweets. Yeah. They're, treats or whatever. But it was just easy to kind of lump those in and say, oh, Android's dessert-based themes. But, yeah, it was more of a, I think, a universally accepted misconception or something.
Right.
So let's talk a little bit about 1.6 Donut. But before we do, paint me a picture of what the world was like, Luke.
Yeah.
September 2009. What's going on?
So let's jump into what was at the box office. What were the things that people were into watching? The big one, I think, for probably at this time, was Paranormal Activity. It was the first one. And this is, the kind of the found footage craze of, and it was, I remember people talking like, "Do you see that paranormal?
You have to see it in the theater. It's so crazy.
Yeah,
it set off like this whole genre, or kind of reawoken the Blair Witch Project. Found like, oh, this thing is kind of freaky because it's not a conventional movie.
Well, and it was the scary part in those is the unknown, right? So you're a viewer just watching this footage, and you have no idea what's going to happen. You don't know what's going to come up on the screen at you, or there was no regular cinematography tricks that you would happen. Yeah,
the jump scares were like somebody stepping in front of a camera,
right?
Instead of a camera turning around,
or in case of Paranormal Activity, a sheet moving,
right? Or the idea of watching a time lapse of somebody standing over a bed for 4 hours, like, oh, that's scary, Man, that set off a whole thing. Like the sequels every year, and like now we're, man. So this is the first Paranormal Activity.
The first one, and then on the opposite end of the spectrum, there,
less scary,
but also, if you watch it back now, I think I watched it couple years ago with the kids, some pretty poignant, remarks on the world at large, but it was Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs. Remember that one?
Yeah, dude. I mean, it just came out.
Yeah, right?
It feels like it just, kind of...
3D animation, very stylized, funny.
You get some adult stuff in there that you laugh at, the kids don't get.
Right.
But, man. Okay, so that's what's going on in the box office. Anything else?
I mean, so the other thing if we're talking box office, that was when Patrick Swayze passed.
Which feels...
not that long ago.
Yeah, it feels... If you say that it was, 2009...
Sure.
Sounds different than just saying when Patrick Swayze died. Like, he feels like that just kind of happened.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, you're like, yeah, that makes sense.
Right.
And this is one of those weird things that kind of give you that time dilation, depending on what lens you look through history.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Okay, so small screen. What's happening on TV?
Oh, man. So, the debut, there's two notable debuts that we pulled. One notable, I think, maybe a smaller spectrum was Archer, kind of a cult following TV show.
Which is getting ready to have another new season, I think, around now.
Yeah.
Or it has. I haven't seen.
And then the other debut was Modern Family.
Which is a show, and that's what's so weird about looking at these.
Yeah.
Is these are shows that have come
and gone.
And had, like, long, what feels like fully fleshed out story arcs and seasons. And
yeah, I mean, that was, so 11 seasons, I think? Is it 10 seasons of that show?
That's nuts.
But, that, it was Modern Family. It's a show about, 3 different families, all related, with kids, and we saw those kids grow up on screen.
It's really weird to look at some of those old episodes and think, did they recast that? Like, no, that's him now.
Yeah.
That's just what he looks like. Wow.
Um,
What else? I see one other note here.
Yeah.
This also speaks to what the world was like, or what broadcast television was like.
Exactly. So it was Barney and Friends, but in HD, high definition, you could see all of the purple,
the fuzz and
the fuzz.
This is a time when shows were available or starting to become available in HD, and there was the whole thing about actresses and actors who were upset because you could see the detail in their faces, and this isn't as great as it should. It's like, sure, it's great, but now it kind of, the makeup and all these things are being exposed.
You lose a little bit of the magic in the HD. I remember seeing, my my wife is still of the opinion she doesn't necessarily love watching full, like, 4K drama movies because she just says it feels too real.
It does. And if it's at the right frame rate, or if you have the TV, like the color settings, at the right settings, it just feels like you're watching...
It's an uncanny valley kind of feeling.
Like, am I looking through a box into a world?
Right.
Or am I watching a movie?
Right.
It feels different. And at the time, we're also talking, like, some sports were being broadcast in HD, and some things were not. So, things that we take for granted, we have HD on our phones now.
Right.
We stream 4K content on a device that's 5-6 inches in our pocket. So this is really interesting to think that even like a 32 or a 50-inch television at the time was not broadcasting some of your content or shows in that resolution.
Right. And then if you move over to music, there's some very interesting things going on.
Yep. I'm looking at the list.
Go ahead.
So, I got a feeling. Black Eyed Peas, this thing, I think, if you want to get people on the dance floor at a wedding, This is one of the ones you throw on.
Yeah.
You get people who are feeling themselves pretty well, had enough to drink. They'll get them out there.
Yeah.
Feels like that's been around forever.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, September 2009, that was one of the top songs on the chart.
Mm-hmm.
What's another one?
So it's funny because in just earlier in the same year, we talked about a debut of a
I'm
movie.
gonna let you finish.
Yeah,
but
right?
I'm gonna no.
Perfect.
Yeah, no. Actually, I'll save it. But if you know what I'm doing, you know what I'm doing.
So there was the Party in the USA. Miley Cyrus was top of the charts, and this was the Miley Cyrus, and people were like, well, wait, that's Hannah Montana.
Yeah.
There was that whole situation.
Right. Like, no, that's Billy Ray Cyrus's daughter.
Yeah.
And she's a real person who actually sings her own songs, and it's not TV. Yeah, that was that's another one of those songs where if you put it on at a party or a gathering, you're going to get people. Yeah, they'll turn up for it. And then, so that's, And
then what you were talking about before was the infamous interruption. Taylor Swift was giving her speech at the MTV Music Awards.
Kanye West
decided to, speak his mind.
Sure.
And this was the beginning of us seeing the unraveling of Kanye West.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing is, like, that feels like that meme, those pictures, the usage of that has been around for a long time.
Sure.
So keep that in mind as you look back at Android and you think of these things that your phone can do, that you kind of just assume it's going to do that and it's going to work flawlessly. A long time ago, it couldn't do it.
Right.
And so that's where Android 1.6 Donut, we will talk about some of the things that Google had added or baked in to the platform itself. Now, we started to kind of see this in the last episode. We talked briefly about it, but anytime there was like an obstacle or some kind of something where it was like, oh, this is less than ideal, we have to figure out a workaround, how to get this to work for us. And we saw handset makers and carriers kind of working together to add these features in before Android gave it like a platform level support.
Sure.
So we start to see some things show up that you're like, well, wait, I thought the phone the year before had that. Well, that wasn't built into Android.
Right.
Luke, what are some of the things that were being built into Android 1.6?
So, I mean, the biggest thing, and kind of we hinted at it last episode, was support for CDMA network.
Mm-hmm.
The Hero came out, and it was this thing where, until that point, it was GSM only.
Mm-hmm.
And then they said, hey, this is the phone, this is the operating system for everyone.
Right.
So let's make it available to everyone.
And without spoiling or getting ahead too far in the future, this was a thing for Sprint.
Yeah.
But it really set the table for a major release later in the year through Verizon.
Yes.
So having that built into Android was a pretty monumental feature that now you just look at it and go, phones are available at all carriers.
Yeah.
I don't even know what GSM means. I don't care.
Right.
CDMA, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
People there, that's just a thing that people don't even care about. But at a certain point, you couldn't get an Android phone on Verizon.
Right.
Because the phones didn't support it.
Right.
So, CDMA was officially introduced.
And then with, we talked about, Barney being in HD, the phones got better displays too.
Yes.
WVGA display support, 720 by 480 or 800 by 450 resolutions.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, those were noticeably better on the phone.
Yep. And that's where you look at it and go, wait, that 3.5, that 4-inch screen looks a whole lot better than the other one that I saw last year, or the one that my buddy's been carrying around. That was a big step up.
Yeah.
To build that into it and say, okay, yeah, games can look this clear.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 800 by 480. There was also, and some carriers or phone makers would flip the numbers around because of orientation.
Sure.
So some phones were considered held portrait mode because of the keyboard.
Right.
Or, sorry, landscape, and then portrait mode if you were doing one hand, touch only. But now today, we have phones that are, 2,300 pixels by 1440 or whatever. So as to whether the human eye can, discern the difference or whatever, that's debatable.
Sure.
But it really did kind of move us from hey, this camera that's on your phone that you can record video, take pictures, it's recording in technically an HD video, 720 or whatever, and you can see that on your phone.
Yeah.
So, what are some of the other things that were added to Android that a user might recognize or see?
A quick search box. And also that search box included your apps and your music and your contacts. So you had this box and you could search for anything.
And that's something that's still today, Android still, on the stock experience, they still put that on there as the ability to go in and, I take for granted that it's a Google search box.
Yeah.
So if I'm looking for something, I just type it right on my home screen.
Yeah.
I lived for a while without that search box, but I kind of come to rely on that.
Yeah.
But I also, every once in a while, depending on what device I'm using and how many apps I've got installed on it, I may use that search box to launch an app.
Yeah.
To go in and type in PA and have it automatically pull, filter my apps down to Google Pay.
Yeah.
Instead of opening and trying to scroll through and find the icon.
I do that all the time when I'm trying to find the Level app because I can never remember what it's called on my phone. So I just search for Level and it pops up.
Yep. And that was mind-blowing.
Yeah.
That this one box that you had the power of Google, that was Android, Google in your pocket.
Right.
But here we are, about a year after the first phone and the first release. Now that Google search also can pull up your music. So if you just type in that same box and you type in Black Eyed Peas, you're going to get any songs that you have on your phone
right.
That are in there. And same thing for contacts.
Yeah.
If you are a person that, you add your Gmail account and you've got tons of business contacts, instead of going into the contact and scrolling, you can just type in a certain, the last name or whatever.
Right.
Something so, and to describe it to people who've only ever known that, can't remember a time before that.
Yeah. I mean, just think about the ease of use. So normally you had to go open your menu, and then you had to go into your contacts, and then you had to scroll through and find the contact.
Mm-hmm.
With the expanded search bar, you could just type that name in from your home screen and find it.
Or start typing L.
Yeah.
And it would start to pull up things that's do you mean Luke?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, that's exactly.
Yeah.
It's not as quick or as smart as it is today,
right.
but it was a huge step forward.
Yeah. And it was just, they're showing that they are continually refining the OS, refining this Android experience to make it more user-friendly, to make it the thing in your pocket that does what you need it to do.
And that's something I think is lost on a lot of people, is because Android is Google, they kind of assume that the left hand and the right hand always work together,
right,
and see what's going on. But the Android team is trying to kind of do its own thing. At the same time, Google is moving in different spaces. And it's interesting to see the mobile saying, ooh, we can also do this. We can tap into that. So any other features that you want to touch on before we talk about the phones?
Yeah, so we talked a little bit last episode about the widgets and just widget support in general. This is where we really started to see more of those power control widgets. So turning your Wi-Fi on and off, turning your Bluetooth on and off, things like that, kind of making it these quick access things rather than having to go into the settings and pull up a menu and all that kind of stuff. The other, little one was you could select multiple photos to delete. Instead of going and delete and then pull up another photo, delete, pull up another photo, delete.
Yeah.
You could select multiple and delete them all at one time. Because as the cameras were getting better, we were taking more and more pictures.
Right.
And don't have that pose right, and you spend the next 10 minutes after you take a picture going through and deleting the old ones.
And this is just a gallery app.
Yeah.
This isn't anything fancy like cloud sync, backup, anything. You're just looking at it on your phone and thinking, yeah, this shutter speed on this thing, it's low light, it's terrible. I got to get rid of it.
Mm-hmm.
One photo at a time.
Yeah.
Prior to this.
Then the probably one of the bigger things that kind of has stayed and even gone better and better is text to speech. You can
And that's, again, we use that so much
mm-hmm.
that it's interesting to think back at a time when you couldn't do that. Everything had to be physically typed.
Mm-hmm.
That we just talk right into our, we hold our phone up and people drive and do whatever. They talk right into their phone and text people or do a search. That it wasn't until this point, or it was all the way back at this point, that they introduced that.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the things that we've lived with for a long time now.
Yeah.
So text-to-speech has really gone and done quite a bit in the 12 years or so.
Yeah,
but
for sure.
Also, to me, very strange to think of a time before that.
Right.
I can't... It would be an interesting exercise for me to try not to use the mic on my phone for input.
Well, and you think, I think in part of this, when we're looking back and what the roadmap has looked like and what has changed, sometimes you think, well, why was it now? Why did they come out with it then?
Mm-hmm.
What was the need for that? And, more and more people were using cell phones.
Mm-hmm.
Phones were getting smarter and smarter, but people were still doing their normal day-to-day lives, and we saw a lot more driving and being on the phone.
Yep.
People distracted. That's the same. We were just right at the beginning of seeing all the bumper stickers of "Don't text and drive."
It can wait,
It
right?
can wait. Or,
yeah.
Those commercials. Gosh, those commercials were so horrible. I mean, they did their job, but they're rough. And so that's what they were like, hey, how do we help?
Right, and it isn't like we're adding this to a phone because we can.
Yeah,
it's kind of like we have almost like a moral obligation.
Yeah, we see the problem we're creating. Maybe,
Mm-hmm.
Not to say that, I don't want to say that necessarily, because I think we are...
But those have to be part of those conversations.
Right. We're beings that make our own choices, but when the technology's there, we're also idiots.
Yeah.
So...
Look, we're cavemen that were handed flames,
right,
and we took off running with them,
right,
and we didn't know the danger of it.
Right.
So I think that, with phones, a full keyboard instead of like a T9,
mm-hmm.
like I could pound out a text message with the phone in my pocket
mm-hmm.
using T9 text. I just knew how many to hit M and then L, and to just do these things without having to look at my phone.
Mm-hmm.
But then when you start to put on a full physical keyboard, or even worse, a software one that has no physical, like you don't know
where you are necessarily on the
right
screen.
So you're staring at your phone. That was a huge kind of, it just became a thing all of a sudden, is people are staring at their phones. These things are priced to move, and they're really cool, and the iPhone is really popular. So when you start to look at that, I think you do start to have these conversations internally of, what do? We can't be part of the problem without being able to provide part of a solution.
Right.
So that's very, very interesting. Text-to-speech.
Yeah.
So, Luke, let's talk about devices.
Yeah, so
at that time, 2009, we are, like I said earlier, about a year into Android. So there are 4 or 5 phones kind of floating around. But at this time, Motorola comes out with its first phones. So we talked about HTC, Samsung, and now Motorola, a mainstay in the phone industry, says we're ready to do some Android things. And boy, did they do some things.
Oh man, they did all kinds of things. I mean, this is the company that was on the heels of the Razor. You know, they were high on the horse of arguably one of the most popular phones in the country.
Of all time.
Yeah.
Yeah. A couple years removed from this thing, now it's how do we work with smart software?
Right.
And they really try to do some interesting things.
Yeah, they did.
They took, I don't want to say they tried, they did some interesting things. And not just in terms of software, but hardware too.
Yeah.
In terms of software, and we talked about this on the last one, HTC had its own custom UI, or skin as it's commonly known as. That was Sense UI. Motorola came out with one called Motoblur.
Right.
And the idea behind it was it blurred all of your stuff together and presented it in a way that said, here, this is you.
Yeah.
This is your home screen. So here, let me show you the latest tweet from the people you follow.
Right.
Let me show you the latest Facebook update. Let me give you access to post a status update from your screen. And it was just kind of like let's throw it all together in some widgets. And again, this is where we get into really widgets starting to take off. Is Motoblur says, and don't forget, this is also as tying in MySpace.
Yeah. Wow.
MySpace still existed.
Yeah.
And it was just like that, hey, this is my social media presence.
Right.
I don't have to go into any app. I can see it all right here.
Right.
Was it beautiful? No.
No.
Practical? Yeah, debatable. But it was, I think they were trying to do the right thing because they saw where people were going with their devices.
Yes.
Well, if I could post an update from my phone, I might as well make it easy for them to do that.
I'll post more.
Yeah.
I'll use my phone more.
Exactly. So that was Motoblur. And when they came out with the software, another thing that they built into it was the ability to do remote wipe of a device. So if you ever lose your phone or it's stolen, for a while, you were kind of out of luck. It was, they're going to get in and see my stuff or whatever, but you could remotely wipe your phone using its software. You also had to have a Motoblur account.
Yeah.
That was another thing that it was just one more thing to sign up for. And data at the time, we're still talking about 3G networks, so sometimes things didn't load. Sometimes things needed to be refreshed. And it was awesome when it worked and looked really kind of completely different than anything else. You could look at a software screen and know right away that's Motorola.
Yeah.
Now, let's pivot to the hardware because they threw all kinds of hardware at the wall too.
Yeah, it feels like in that design lab, they just said yes.
Yeah.
And I think
truly,
that's what they did. Somebody was like, well, what if we did this? Sure, let's try it.
Yeah, what if I want this thing to slide open like a physical keyboard?
Cool.
What if I wanted it to flip open and have the keyboard on the back?
Yeah, let's try that.
What if I had one that looked like maybe a makeup compact?
Okay.
And I wanted to kind of like flip it out so that it was kind of like 2 little squares.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, go for that.
Which one?
Yep.
That's truly what it was. Now, the thing is, you didn't have that choice at every carrier.
Right.
If you wanted one of these designs, you had to play by the carrier that offered it.
Sure.
And that was one of the most aggravating things was Android is really starting to take off and be about choice. But at the same time, the carriers, the old guard, still kind of had that control over the space.
Sure.
The phone makers kind of bent the knee to them.
Right. And this opens, I feel like the beginning of the conversations where you would start hearing the word fragmentation.
A lot. Yeah, and because rightfully the hardware for one, but now we're talking about 3 versions of Android inside of a year.
Yep.
So when a phone would be announced and we saw this afterwards is, oh, that's only 1.5. Well, 1.6 is out.
When can I get that on my device?
Right. And that's a terrible F word. And it triggers some memories immediately when you start to think about that.
Yes.
That was low-hanging fruit.
It was a fair argument. You know, when you had the biggest argument was, well, I have an iPhone or my buddy has an iPhone and everybody gets the same update.
Yep. And this phone's been out for 1.5 years, 2 years. We all have the same. Now, today, in the big scheme of things, most people don't care.
Right.
They don't even know.
Mm-hmm.
They just know, oh yeah, I think it's an Android phone. It's not an iPhone, so it must be a Droid or must be an Android phone or whatever. So a lot of people don't care. They don't know.
Right.
And to be honest, a lot of that user-facing stuff is not as obvious.
No.
It's a lot of developer stuff. It's a lot of things behind the scenes and things of like, we can help you with digital well-being. So we can help you with how much screen time you have, and we can monitor your data and your battery optimizations and all these little things. But at this time, 2009, we're talking about pretty cool features.
Mm-hmm.
Voice to speech, or I'm sorry, text to speech, speech to text, all of these. Well, I don't know how many different ways I could say that, but that's a pretty big thing.
Huge.
And if you want your phone to do that, you're sitting there on forums and message boards, messaging, emailing, at the time trying to maybe tweet at carriers and handset makers saying, where's my cupcake? Where's my donut? Where's, So that fragmentation is a whole can of worms to talk about. And deservedly, because if you look at just Motorola alone, and you've got, at the time you're talking about devices called the Charm, the Backflip, the Click, or in other countries it was the Dext.
Yeah.
These were each different hardware, so then they weren't all guaranteed to get the same software.
Yeah.
So even if you bought a Motorola, you weren't guaranteed to get the same software update that somebody else who owns a Motorola.
You had a different version of Motoblur than somebody else who had a Motorola.
Yeah, right. So, that's frustrating because when you're only a year into Android, it's still trying to sell itself. They're still trying to kind of put the benefits of what it does and the capabilities out there. So it's an early adopter, enthusiast kind of thing. And that's the quickest thing to do to aggravate them.
Yeah.
Is to just kind of stand in their way.
Yeah.
If it's a general consumer product and the masses really don't care, they really don't care.
Sure.
But if you say, hey, I know you love this and I know you love the idea of Android and all these capabilities, that's cool, but I'm not going to let you do this yet.
Yeah.
Or we don't know for sure what our timeline looks like. And there was a big thing, in the following year or a couple of years after that was, here's the timeline for software updates. And then you would see, oh my gosh, this phone never even got one.
Right.
Or it took a full year, which is absurd. But at the time, it was kind of like acceptable.
Yeah.
That it was like, well, you still have to submit this to Verizon or T-Mobile, and they have to kind of give it their blessing.
Right.
So, yeah, man. And we'll just talk briefly about like what the hardware looks like, because that's what we've done so far.
Yeah.
Motorola, on average, this is kind of like the Motorola Click. So we're kind of painting a broad picture.
But all of them are fairly similar with specs.
Yeah.
Hardware specs, anyways.
$200 for the phone with a contract. So you're signing up for 2 years, get the phone for $200. 528 megahertz processor again.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, we're still seeing that. And, you know, as you look back, you're kind of like, well, it was, I mean, there weren't that many devices, so it does kind of make sense. But it was also interesting that every device that seems to come out had the same processor.
Well, and you also started to see, I don't think at this point we're quite there yet, but we were starting to see these phones are doing more, and it's getting harder to do that.
Yep. Yeah, with the same tech.
Yeah.
Like, no, wait a second. This is the same processor, and I'm still only at 256 megs of RAM.
Yeah.
And the storage is, you know, here we're talking about 512. So, again, par for the course. But, man, how can I do all that with this Motoblur?
Yeah.
This thing's pretty heavy. It's sluggish.
Mm-hmm.
You know, out of the box it moves and zips around okay, but you put a couple apps on there and you let Android run in the background and it's not optimized. Exactly. It was like mud.
Yeah.
You know, and getting things. I remember being so high on Android right, I mean, from day one, of course.
Sure.
But being so frustrated with just the idea of trying to call somebody, standing there, and I remember it like it was yesterday, my wife standing there next to me going, seriously, dude, can you just, what are you doing? Call them. And I'm like, I'm waiting for the app.
Yeah.
Like, no, like, baby, I'm showing you, like, it's not me. I'm not,
Right.
I'm not on here browsing Reddit. Well, you know, I'm like, I'm trying to get my phone to do this.
Right.
So, and that kind of brings us to a different point here that we'll see the next generation or so of devices. But we kind of hit that ceiling of like, okay, this is what Android is like and what it's capable of, and this is what the hardware looks like. But the software is moving faster than the hardware.
Yeah.
And the user demands and the expectations are going to start moving faster too.
Sure.
And it's going to get frustrating, and you're going to start to alienate Android users.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, honestly, if I remember correctly, it did that to you personally.
It did.
It wasn't long after this that you actually
Jump ship.
went to iPhone.
I did.
Because it was just, it's great in theory, but we're starting to run into some things where it's just not as exciting.
Yeah, for me it was just I need my phone to do what I need it to do when I need it to do it. And at that point, that was the better option. And then quickly, it changed.
Yeah.
You know, we're talking, and you'll see as these episodes go on, as the season goes on, it's not very long when that ship comes right back around.
And says, you can no longer just say the whole, it just works.
Yeah.
Like, now Android works.
Yeah.
And it continues to get better, of course. But,
It does.
you know, at that time, you know, the Motorola, just to wrap up, again, we're talking about a 3.2-inch screen with a 320 by 480, 5-megapixel camera, 1420 milliamp battery. This has a touchscreen on it, the click, of course. And it has a QWERTY keyboard and a D-pad, so it's kind of that abundance of choice.
Yep.
If you got a different Motorola phone at the time, you might have just the touch with a weird little D-pad in the corner.
Right. Some of them had a full QWERTY keyboard with a little D-pad in the middle.
Yeah. Some very interesting things. I remember fondly.
Yeah.
But I don't know that it's entirely fond memories.
To me, looking back, even just talking Motoblur, that was just a blip.
Yep.
In the scheme of things.
Yeah.
It felt like, I think it was because it was so exciting, and we're like, oh, this is a new release. Only a couple months after this release, and new handset. Oh, this handset, this handset. We were seeing a lot, and it felt like things were moving very fast, and then they kind of were like, not so great. But that was a blip in the big scheme of things.
Well, I'm looking at Wikipedia as you say that,
Uh-huh.
and I'm just looking at what they have for Motoblur. And, of course, we're talking about September 2009.
Yep.
According to Wikipedia, and it says here, in late 2010, Motorola announced that Motoblur would not be their development focus in the future, as Android made custom skins largely redundant.
Yeah.
Redundant.
So that's 2 years.
I mean,
Late 2009 to late 2010.
10. 1.
Oh, 1 year.
You're talking one, give or take,
Yeah.
the devices that came out with that. So, man, that is it's over as quickly as it began. But it was also one of those. It had to happen. Motoblur walked so that we can run.
Right.
You know, and things that Android did at that time that they started to slowly put into it really set the table for much more exciting things.
Yeah. Well, and the customization, and I think the feel of this is my phone, my Motoblur, got a lot of people into it.
Yep.
And it got a lot of people to go, oh, Android is cool. Android, there's a lot of really cool things I can do. And so they definitely widened the audience.
Yep. And we're right at, as we wrap this up, we're right at an interesting point because the next release and the next generation of hardware really propels Android to a new level.
Yeah.
Not just in terms of performance, but brand awareness.
Yep.
And some confusion around that even.
Sure.
But some very exciting kind of like, okay, it's here.
Yeah.
And it's not going anywhere. It's really capable stuff, and it's exciting.
Yep.
So that will be next episode.
Yeah.
So that's going to do it for Android 1.6 Donut. Again, my name is Scott. Luke.
I'm Luke.
Thank you for the trip down memory lane. We will talk to you guys again soon.
See ya.